First up is a pet Intellect Devourer. Now in Act 1, you'll want to be sure to free us, the Intellect Devourer, before leaving the Nautiloid. You want to do this because later on in Act 2, you'll be able to free us again and get him as a permanent pet. So take that elevator when you exit the first room of the game and gently remove us, and make sure not to lobotomize him either, because that will give him an ailment later in Act 2. Also make sure he doesn't die while you have him in Act 1, because if he dies, then he's dead and he's not going to be in Act 2. Next up is the Spider Swarm pet. How would you like to have a bunch of spiders as allies, with a max of 5, each with 6 health? To get them, there's a cliff right outside the grove, and at the top of that is a little camp. On the right side of that camp is a rock with a ton of spiders surrounding a pouch. If you get the pouch, inside is a spider egg, which you can actually drop on the ground and then attack to break open, and you'll have 4 spider minions at your command. It's really cool, although I wish you could summon them over and over, but it's just a one-time thing. You get to enjoy having a swarm of spiders following you around for a bit. Next up is Scratch. Scratch is a dog you can find in the forest just northeast of the Blighted Village. If you're friendly towards him and pass one of 3 difficulty checks, you can eventually give your scent to him so he can find you at camp. If you do, you'll find him at camp and eventually learn the spell Find Familiar Scratch. This ritual spell can be used once per short rest, and Scratch has some very useful abilities. He has Scratch's Sniff, which notifies you that he found something of note nearby, usually a dirt mound that you can dig up. Scratch also has Help, giving him the ability to help up downed teammates and remove certain conditions. He's also not all bark either. He has Bite, which deals piercing damage, and you can also play fetch with Scratch back at camp by using Throw. Scratch will just approach you and bring back anything you throw to him in camp, which can be a fun pastime. Alright, next up is Summon Ogre Horde. This was so cool when I stumbled upon this. So in the Blighted Village, there are 3 ogres camped around a dead tiefling. If you engage in conversation and choose the right dialogue options, you can get these 3 ogres to fight for you for free. You're gonna have to roll a 20, but you can convince them that their reward for fighting for you is going to be them being able to eat the enemies that you slay. So they're going to agree, and they're going to give you an item called Lump's Horn, and all you gotta do is, like, when you're in combat, just blow the horn, and these 3 massive ogres are going to come help you and fight your enemies. However, after each summon, there is a catch. You know, they're going to say, oh, this isn't enough food. Why should we keep fighting for you? And you're going to have to convince them to fight for you again. So after you summon them the first time, you can tell them, okay, next time you can eat the enemy, but we're also going to give you like 1,000 gold, right? After the next fight, right? So you don't have to give them gold now. You just promise it later. So you can just kind of keep these ogres working for you, kind of just give them a carrot to chase after, and they'll just keep fighting for you, which is really cool. Coming in at number 2 is the Quasit pet. Now the Quasit pet can be summoned from the Scroll of Summon Quasit. You can find this scroll in one of the boxes in the cellar of the alchemist's house located in the Blighted Village. I suggest learning the spell instead of using the scroll, because the scroll is a one-time use, but if you learn it, it's actually a ritual spell, meaning it doesn't use a spell slot and it can't be used during combat anyway, so you can use it as many times as you want. It's a permanent Quasit pet that's actually really, really useful. Besides being an extra body that can take hits and attack, it's also got invisibility, which when attacking while invisible to start combat will surprise enemies, making them all skip their turn, which is really powerful. Also, if you choose the right dialogue options as a warlock, wizard, or sorcerer, you can also learn to summon Shovel, meaning you could technically get 2. And if you like that tip, don't forget to click that like button and subscribe for more Baldur's Gate 3 videos. Next up is the Danse Macabre. This powerful spell summons 4 undead minions, and in order to get this, you need to first find a book in Act 1. That book is called The Necromancy of Fae. This book is in the room hidden behind the ornate mirror in the room where you just found the Quasit. You'll need to answer a few questions correctly, and then the ornate mirror will let you pass. Once inside, you'll find a locked and barred door with a couple of traps protecting this book. Use a character proficient with lockpicking and disarming to get past it and pick up the book. Once you have it, you'll need to find a dark amethyst in order to open it. The nearest one is in the Whispering Depths, which is below the Blighted Village. You can just take the well and go down there. There's also one in Act 3 if you missed this one, but once you place the amethyst in the book, you'll need to pass several checks, eventually leading to learning forbidden knowledge. Now, some of these checks are actually pretty high rolls. I think it eventually gets up to 20, so you'll want to be quick saving before the roll, and then after you succeed, I think there's a total of 3 rolls. If you're a sorcerer, when opening the Necromancy of Thay book, you can instead choose the class options of sorcerer and dialogue, which are charisma based rather than wisdom. It's going to be much easier as a sorcerer. At the end of these rolls, you're going to walk away with the spell Speak with Dead learned, but there is actually more to the book, however, but not until Act 3. But the reason you'll want to do this now, though, is so that you have the book, because you can't go back, and then eventually, by having this book, you'll learn how to summon an army of ghouls with it from the spell Danse Macabre in Act 3. So definitely pick this up if you're interested in having that spell later. All right, next up is Second Marriage. If you're looking for a zombie pet right here, right now, look no further. This amazing zombie summon has a buff called Undead Fortitude, causing it to come back to life instead of dying, unless the killing blow was radiant or a critical hit. Now, unfortunately, when it comes to its offensive abilities, he just has Slam, which does 4 to 9 damage. So he's kind of just a meat bag when it comes to hits. However, to summon your zombie, you just need an item called Second Marriage, which can be used over and over, only using an action. The one downside of this, though, is that the zombie only lasts 10 turns. Not too bad, really, considering you could just resummon him after 10 turns, and 10 turns is a pretty good chunk of time. Now, in order to get Second Marriage, you'll need to save Mayrina from the hag. So go into the witch's lair, and after you've let the hag get away, there's going to be a wand in the second area called Bitter Divorce. Grab that wand and the other valuables you're interested in, and then exit through the mushroom ring and head towards the coffin, and you're going to find Mayrina next to her husband's corpse. You can then use the wand to resurrect him as a zombie, and you're going to get a few choices of what to do with the wand, and I recommend you keep it so that you can summon a zombie at will for the rest of the game, and I think that's just perfect for a necromancer build. It doesn't even require a corpse, and then, you know, pair this with the Necromancy of Thay, and you've got a really nice necromancer build coming together, which is really cool. Next up are the Spore Servants. By using animating spores from Sovereign Glut in the Underdark, you can reanimate the corpse of any monstrosity type creature you encounter in Acts 1 and 2, and it will become your pet for as long as you and Glut remain in the Underdark. You can get Glut to join you by accepting the quest from Spa in the Myconid colony to eliminate the Dwergar and then talking to Glut. Once he's on your team, you can use animating spores on the corpse of any monstrosity type creature that you can bring to the Underdark, since Glut won't leave the Underdark and he also won't cross Ebon Lake, so you can't bring him to the Grimforge. First up is the Pet Mimic. To get the Mimic as your Spore Servant, you need to head to Moonrise Towers. Once you get to the top of the stairs, go past Balthazar's room to eventually find a curious treasure chest that actually turns into a Mimic when you get too close. Slay it and then pick it up. Now, in order to do this, I had Karlach wear the Mighty Cloth, which grants +2 strength and doubles your carrying capacity. I also drank an elixir of Hill Giant Strength for good measure. After emptying Karlach's inventory, she was able to pick up the Mimic. Then it's as easy as teleporting to the Myconid colony and have Glut use animating spores on your new Mimic pet. You can also use these spores on Gnolls. The newly born Gnoll weighed the least, so I dragged his corpse down into the Underdark to offer it up to Glut. As he breathed new life into the corpse, it began to float and glow a sickly green, and I really wasn't sure I was the good guy anymore. Then I was convinced I was the bad guy when I commanded the Gnoll to tear off its ear and use it as a throwing weapon. You can even use these spores on the Harpies in the Emerald Grove. You'll need to slay them and carry their corpses to Glut, but these are pretty light, so you shouldn't need much strength. They actually keep their luring song ability, which is pretty cool, but the music doesn't play when you use the ability, which is a bummer. And the Harpies are also missing quite a few animations such as climbing, so they kind of just glide down ladders in this weird squatted position, kind of like they're taking a dump. You can also use these spores on the Gremishka and the Rosymorn Monastery, but sadly they do not keep their magic allergy as a Spore Servant, which would have been really cool. So it's kind of just like a cat familiar with a much stronger bite. Also, it doesn't have fur if you ever wanted a furless cat pet. And you can even use these spores on the Ettercaps, which wins the award for the grossest pet I think I've ever seen in this game. As if the Ettercap wasn't gross enough in life, in unlife as a Spore Servant, this monstrosity truly earns that label. It can shoot webs, multi-attack, and ice skate? Yep, when the Ettercap tries to sneak, he actually breaks out his ice skates and glides around. And you can use these spores as well on wargs. There is one small one named Claw at an outpost right before the goblin encampment. Being lighter than other wargs is perfect since we need to drag his corpse to Glut to reanimate, and the other wargs are too heavy. The undead warg looks incredibly gross too and just has bite, so really not the best Spore Servant, but very nearly the grossest looking. And of course, it's widely known you can also use these spores on the Bulette. This massive monstrosity creature burrows and emerges periodically while you are in the Underdark Underdark until you slay it, and this is one of the best creatures to use animating spores on because of its massive health pool and high damage. You can also use the animating spores on all of the phase spiders, from the smallest ones to the biggest one, and all are considered monstrosities and can be animated as your Spore Servant. The phase spider Ethereal Jaunt is a really cool looking ability to help it get into position. You can also use the animating spores on the Minotaur, found in the Underdark as well. These massive monstrosities have really cool art and are definitely up there in terms of good choices for animating spores. And last, you can also use animating spores on hook horrors. These can be found near the Sucer tree in the Underdark and are quite powerful too, able to knock enemies prone and then use multi-attack on them for burst damage. And next up is a pet Drider. Being that there is only one Drider in Baldur's Gate 3, we'll need to go after Karnus, Light of the Absolute, in Act 2. And the way to get him as a permanent pet is to use Control Undead on him. Now you might ask, but he's alive, so we'll need to unalive him and make sure he gets turned into a Shadow Cursed Undead. This is possible by avoiding the convoy and going straight to the Harper ambush spot. Instead of the Harpers though, you'll be there, and you'll actually be presented with some unique dialogue options for hiding. If you eventually reveal yourself, you can demand the lantern from Karnus and send the convoy on its way without protection from the Shadow Curse. If you do, you'll actually find them later right outside Moonrise Towers, being Shadow Cursed Undead. Now, one thing about using Control Undead on Karnus is that your target needs to be lower level than you. Karnus is level 6, so you need to be level 7. But once you're level 7, you have almost a 100% chance to succeed on your roll to use Control Undead on Karnus. And he's got quite the health pool, making him a formidable ally for Act 2. And not only that, but he also has Spindleweb Fanaticism. Spindleweb Fanaticism grants you an additional 1d6 psychic damage and is a damage rider, so it is most effective on characters with a lot of attacks. Since the Drider is alive and most players probably don't turn Karnus into a Shadow Cursed Undead in order to control him, this aura is pretty rare to be kept beyond the convoy. Next up is Us Part 2. If you freed Us in Act 1, then you're actually going to find within the Mind Flayer Colony's morgue, inside of a cage along the wall, your old companion Us, who can become your permanent companion if you free him. You'll encounter a humanoid named Chop that you'll either need to convince him to release Us or slay him for the key to the cage. But once you free Us, you'll receive an item called Summon Us, which is described as a sticky, graying mass exuding a slightly sweet, putrid odor. You can summon Us once every short rest, and Us has 65 HP at level 4 and can claw your enemies. But what's probably one of the coolest things about Us is that it will magically change its form to a cat when entering town to avoid causing a panic. What a good brain kitty. Alright, next up is the Shadow Wraith pet. In Act 2, within Balthazar's hidden room, there lies a necromantic sigil inscribed on his workbench. If you interact with this sigil as Gale, you can use the materials remaining on the bench to create a Shadow Lantern. One dead pixie and one broken moon lantern later, and Gale has a new lantern which can be used to conjure a formidable Shadow Lantern Wraith. This Wraith has 24 health and can use Strength Drain, causing 3d8 necrotic damage and possibly leech its target's strength by 3. It can also use Necrotic Claws, which deal 7 to 17 damage. This level 6 necromancy spell requires a medium or small corpse and can be used once per long rest. Not bad at all. Alright, number 9 is Quothe the Raven. This is an allusion to Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven poem, but it is also a permanent pet you can summon using the Raven gloves, which have the level 3 conjuration spell, Summon Quothe the Raven. To acquire these gloves, you'll need to head far to the east in the Shadowlands and speak to He Who Was. He will give you a quest to find a ledger inside the bar known as the Waning Moon. The wretched distiller, Thizzabald Thorm, will initiate dialogue with you, leading to either combat or his demise. You'll find the ledger nearby, and once you return to He Who Was, choose the correct dialogue options, and he will reward you with the Raven gloves, and you have a new pet Raven. And number 10 is the Infernal Rapier. This very rare rapier grants a +1 bonus to spell save DC and melee caster, which grants the wielder the ability to use their spellcasting ability modifier for attack rolls instead of of their dexterity modifier. And the holder also gains Planar ally, Cambion, once per long rest. So this rapier is quite rare to find because the only way to get it is by freeing Zariel's asset in Act 2 while you have Will in the party, and then you also have to pass a DC 14 persuasion check to ask for a reward, which is this sword. So if you want this weapon, you'll need to save the grove, right, so that Will doesn't leave, and then you're going to have to make sure to have Will tag along for when you're rescuing Zariel's asset. And since you can't fast travel or go back to camp while you're in the Mind Flayer colony, you basically have to fight Ketheric with Will in your party as well. So it is a little tricky to get this particular weapon if you don't have Will in your party beforehand.
All right, next up is a hidden summoning spell.
Within the basement of Sorcerer's Sundries, there is a hidden room containing a book called Caution Before the Seelie. This book recounts the experience of a halfling forced to join the Seelie court. When you read it, you're given a scroll of bestial communion. This scroll can be used to cast Sights of the Seelie, summon Deva. This powerful companion has Revivify, Help, and Wrathful Smite, along with a whopping 136 HP. And if you have at least one level of wizard on your character, you can of course scribe this scroll into your spellbook, allowing you to cast this spell by using a level 5 spell slot once per short rest, which is amazing to be able to have this pet basically permanently. And last, the Danse Macabre. Once you acquire the Tharkeite Codex, while it's in your inventory of the same character that has the Necromancy of Thay, you can read the Necromancy of Thay again and you'll be faced with a wisdom check. If you manage to pass it, you will learn the Danse Macabre spell. This spell is a level 5 necromancy spell that summons 4 ghouls to fight for you, previously 6. However, if you're a necromancer subclass wizard, this spell is currently summoning 5 instead, which is pretty awesome. It's a very powerful spell that requires you to have gotten both the Necromancy of Thay in Act 1 and then the Tharkeite Codex in Act 3, so it's actually really quite rare if you didn't know about these 2 items beforehand. Now, in order to find the Tharkeite Codex, you'll need to ascend Ramazith's Tower by taking the portal in Sorcerer's Sundries. Once there, you'll see a curious set of furniture floating and glowing blue, and you can actually jump down to them and reach the middle floor. You'll need to use Sea Invisibility or find the Elixir of Sea Invisibility on the outer ring of the tower to read the plaques, which are invisible, which detail which weave buttons do what. And you'll be looking for a weave button that says Vault. Now, pressing the wrong weave button can lead to activating pretty difficult to kill arcane cannons, so make sure you're pushing the right one. Pressing the Vault button teleports you there, and you'll be looking for a door called Ramazith. Behind that door are 3 more doors and a puzzle. You'll need to pass through the right sequence of doors to find a lever that will open the door leading to the Tharkeite Codex.